power through it because I know we're like way over time. But the two previous presenters pretty much like covered half of my presentation already. So it's, and I'm pretty sure I referenced some of your research. So we'll just power through that. But yeah, my name is Dirk Smith. It's David Dirk Smith. I prefer to go by Dirk personally. My pronouns are he, him. I will be presenting on the psychological impact of LGBTQI discrimination in sports. I have done this presentation a few times for football versus homophobia, I think a previous Leap Sports event, and maybe a couple others. So there really isn't anything new and groundbreaking if you've seen those previous ones. But it's nice to actually present in person and actually have a real audience and not just a computer screen and all that stuff. And I also have a video going just because, got to get it for the socials and stuff. All right, so as basically, like I said, everybody else explained, just a real quick review if you haven't been here in the last 5 minutes or you fell asleep or something like that. Homophobia, transphobia, discrimination of all kinds affects mental health, right? And we know how discriminatory behavior comes from individuals, environments, and all these other things. It can lead to social rejection, using language directly or indirectly, right? So either being called a derogatory term or just hearing it out loud can cause a person to feel unsafe. You got microaggressions, discrimination, literally everything you already know, so not exactly, teaching you anything new. Discriminatory behaviors, as we just talked about, have a negative impact on the mental health of LGBTQI people. And then, as we've already mentioned, LGBTQI youth are more likely to be diagnosed with a psychiatric disorder and suffer from debilitating mental health, such as anxiety, depression, bipolar, and different aspects in that regard. In regard to actual sport performance, mental health affects sport performance. Basically saying, if you have good mental health, you're more likely to have a good performance, right? If you have bad mental health, you're more likely to have a bad performance. So there's a strong correlation there. And again, some statistics that I think everybody's already pretty generally familiar with. But the last point I want to mention is that discrimination in sports and PE environments undermine the three basic psychological needs that drive human behavior and emotion. And that's the point of my presentation, is how does this mental health affect motivation? How does it affect participation? How does it affect a person's willingness to engage in sport? And I think Dr. Woods' example about the youth trans swimmer, right? And how, for example, they can train and practice, but in the end, they ultimately quit the sport because they couldn't compete. And that all comes down to motivation. So there's this theory called the self-determination theory, developed by Deci and Ryan back in 2000. And basically, it breaks down motivation into three general categories. A motivation, which is you're not motivated to anything, you're not going to show up, nobody cares. You got the extrinsic motivation. This motivation is driven by external rewards or avoidance of guilt, right? So if you're saying, oh, I'm doing this because I'm getting paid, or I'm doing this because I have a sense of obligation, or I don't want to get in trouble or something like that. All of those things are extrinsic motivation. Then you have the intrinsic motivation, which is because you love it. You're passionate about it. You're curious about it. There's no other reward than your own self-fulfillment. And so you can look down here in extrinsic motivation. There's some types. I'm not going to go into detail, but more external, extrinsic, more closer to intrinsic, basically. It's a spectrum, okay? And we're all motivated by different things on different levels in all regard, and our motivation is fluid throughout the day, throughout the month, throughout the year, throughout everything. So at any point, our motivation can come down to anything. For example, I love swimming, so that would be intrinsic for me. However, I really hate doing the backstroke. And sometimes to do the backstroke, I have to reward myself with a taco or something like that. So while I enjoy swimming, in order to do the backstroke, I have to give myself a reward. Basically, kind of breaks down a little bit how motivation works. So our goal is, especially when it comes to inclusion, acceptance, diversity in sport, is we want to inspire the athletes, the sports professionals, the people who are affected by the discrimination. We want to try and make the changes so that they are more on this end of the spectrum, because they're doing it because they feel included, they feel accepted, they feel they don't have to worry about these things. So they can do it because they love doing the sport. They love being part of the community. They love whatever the reason is for doing it, right? But a lot of times when, we don't support those things, then you have to rely on extrinsic factors to keep them engaged, and they're more likely to quit. And that comes down to these three. The basic psychosocial needs: relatedness, competence, autonomy. Autonomy is your choice, your ability to have your own control over your experience and engaging in the task or the sport, for example. In swimming, I like the butterfly, so I'm more likely to train the butterfly. That's an autonomous decision I'm allowed to make. If my coach says, you have to swim the backstroke, you don't want, whether you like it or not, that's not exactly autonomous. That's not a supporting my autonomy in the sport, right? Competence. So competence is about how well you can do the task or execute the skills or things like that. You want to be able to train competence by saying, okay, where are you at in terms of your skill development? And then how do you build up the skills from there, but in a way that's realistic within your capability to learn. So if it's super hard, and it's like, no matter what you try, you always fail, and you can't seem to figure it out, that's a little too hard. That's not going to give you competence. That's not going to support your competence. But if it's too easy, you already know how to do it, you're not challenging yourself, you're not getting anything out of it, that's also not supporting competence. So you have to find the right balance there to say, okay, how can I make this challenging but also still engaging? And then the most important part for us, relatedness. You need the social support. Support of your teammates, support of your coaches, support of your family, support of your friends, support of everybody. And that's, again, kind of hitting the points that we are all familiar with in this room, is the more we have this level of social support, the more we have this sense of relatedness with our community, with our whatever group we're in, maybe our team, organization, whatever, the higher that is, the more likely we are to engage in the sport. Our motivation is more intrinsic because we want to see friends, we want to be there, we just enjoy it. Okay? So, leading from there, as I'm sure this is a shocker to nobody, discrimination negatively impacts your basic psychosocial needs. Again, feelings of autonomy, competence, relatedness foster motivation, task engagement, and volition, result in well-being, performance, creativity, all that jazz. Sports and PE classes should be fun from the start, right? Especially with kids. There's really no other reason why kids should participate other than fun. You make it fun for them, they're going to be intrinsically motivated to continue to do it in the future, and then they'll learn all the wonderful, fabulous things that we all love about sports. This way, we can also make sure we improve and support these psychosocial needs, ultimately building mental health, intrinsic motivation, physical health, social health, which ultimately drives performance. A lot of our most successful athletes that we've ever seen, they've been able to achieve success because they are doing it for the love of it, and they want to push themselves, they want to go further, they want to constantly learn, they want to improve, blah, 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 take them all the way up to the top. So our job as leaders is to support this. LGBTQI people love sports. That's why we have gay games, why we have your games, why we have Leap Sports Scotland, why we have all this stuff. We love this stuff, right? My favorite. I'm a little biased, so it's Cheer Colorado, because I'm from Colorado, and I love the cheerleading group out there. So something to keep in mind, individual sports like swimming, cycling, those kind of sports tend to have more out athletes than team sports. When we talk a lot about how the next professional LGBT sports person to come out, yeah, we've got a lot of them in individual sports, but not so much in team sports. It's slowly getting better, but comparatively there's still a distinction, right? So it's up to the team to create inclusive and diverse environments that are designed to fill your psychosocial needs, to help your athletes, not just your individual athletes, but everybody to be successful, right? When we are able to fulfill these psychological needs, we're going to have higher interest levels in the sport. So we talk a lot about sports where there's not a whole lot of interest or maybe a whole lot of engagement, but if it comes out to, hey, this sport is actually really supportive, inclusive, diverse, supports these psychosocial needs, people are going to talk about it. People are going to share about it. They're going to post about it. People are going to be like, oh shit, that looks like fun. I want to do that. Gets more people involved, right? More enjoyment from the game, higher ratings of mental health, improvements in wellness, and overall better performance output. All these things make everybody happy, right? Like Legally Blonde. Anybody? Exercise makes you happy. Happy people don't kill their husbands. Science. As both of my previous colleagues said, inclusion, it's from the bottom up, not from the top down. A lot of people will say, well, the next professional athlete is going to open the floodgates. And girl, no. Because we've already seen a few times. Like, yeah, one or two maybe comes out here and there. Great. Love it. But no floodgates. The gates are open, no flood. LGBTQ athletes are not always visible, but they are there. And this is an important point to consider, not so much in LGBT sports circles, because I figure we all know that we're at some identification of LGBTQI, but in a lot of like mainstream sports structures, competitive elite sports structures, professional stuff like that, in youth as well. They're there. Every coach, every professional that works in sports has had or will have an LGBTQI athlete under their care at some point in their career. You may not know it, but they're there. Their relationship with sport is going to be dependent on how inclusive of an environment that you create for them. When I was a swimmer, I came out when I was 14, I quit. I did not have an inclusive environment. I did not feel supported. I did not have my psychosocial needs fulfilled. I quit the sport. My coach had no idea. I never told him. Nobody knew I was gay, but that ultimately ended up being a major part of the reason. So for me, I did not return to swimming until 6 years later, but a lot of people, they don't come back at all. They miss out on all the amazing things that sports can offer physically, mentally, and socially, which is why it's important that we build a healthy relationship with PE, with physical activity, with exercise, with sports, through inclusion. Again, fulfilling the basic psychological needs, help encourage people to stay in sports. And this, of course, comes down to the diversity trainings. We talked a lot about how creating different structures, changing the structures that we have, building in infrastructure that is more inclusive, but also comes down to how do we talk to the coaches. If a sports leader, a coach, manager, whoever comes up to me and says, how can I as an individual create a supportive, inclusive environment? And I go right back to psychosocial needs. You got to be supportive. You got to have autonomy, competence, relatedness. You got to foster all these things among not just you, but your team. Even in individual sports, like a swim team, you want to create this kind of environment so that if an athlete who is LGBTQI comes into that environment, whether or not they choose to share that with you, doesn't matter. They still feel safe. They still feel welcome. They don't have to worry about being LGBTQI. They could just worry about, oh crap, I gotta swim more backstroke, you know? Like, if that's the biggest stress you have, mission accomplished, right? All right, that's all I got. You can follow me. Oh, sorry, go. Yeah, follow, like, connect. That's what we're here for, right? Got some references as well.